All right, so we're diving into The Mask today, that 90s classic. You sent over a really insightful film critique. I'm excited to dig into it with Yacht. We're not just going to, rehash the plot, though. We're going deeper. Think identity, self-expression, and the whole journey from a pretty dark comic to this.
Yeah.
You know.
Iconic movie.
Yeah, for sure. What struck me right away was how the critique frames The Mask as, like, a commentary on the masks we all wear in real life. It's not just about a guy turning green and wacky. It's about how we present ourselves to the world versus who we really are.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. And the critique really emphasizes Stanley Ipkiss as this everyman figure, right? This timid bank clerk who feels invisible. I mean, you can practically feel his yearning for something more.
Exactly. And that's what makes the transformation so compelling. The mask, which is tied to the Norse god of mischief, Loki, acts as a conduit for all those suppressed desires and frustrations that I think we all experience to some degree. It's like putting on a physical manifestation of your... Oh, wow. So it's not just about the comedic mayhem. It's about what that mayhem represents. But hold on. Before we get too deep into symbolism, we've got to talk about Jim Carrey. The critique highlights his comedic genius and how he blends physical comedy, vocal mimicry, and improvisation to bring the mask to life. I mean, it's over the top, sure, but it works.
Yeah, it totally does. It's interesting you bring up Carrey.
Yeah.
Because the critique actually credits this role as like a turning point in his career. It really solidified him as a comedic force in the 90s. Do you think someone else could have pulled it off? It's such a specific type of energy.
That's a great question. His energy does seem tailor-made for this role, though it makes you wonder what another actor might have done with the character. The critique doesn't go too deep into that what-if scenario, though it does mention that the original comic was actually much darker and more violent.
Right, much darker. The comic portrays the mask as something that essentially turns the wearer into a psychopath. It's fueled by pure rage and id. The film went in a completely different direction, opting for a more comedic, family-friendly approach. This raises a question. Would staying true to the source material's darkness have worked? Or did the filmmakers make the right choice in lightening things up?
That's a tough one. On the one hand, some fans of the comic might be disappointed by the shift in tone. On the other hand, going lighter opened the story up to a much wider audience.
Precisely. It's a classic dilemma in adaptation. How do you balance staying true to the source material with making the story accessible and engaging for a new audience?
Yeah.
And The Mask, despite its comedic tone, still manages to touch on some pretty deep themes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You're right. Like the whole idea of duality. The film cleverly uses the mask itself as a metaphor for the different sides we all have.
Absolutely. There's the side we present to the world, the mask we wear to fit in, and then there's our true self, often hidden beneath the surface. Think about Stanley in his normal life. He's shy, awkward, and overlooked. But when he puts on the mask, all of that is gone. He's confident, charismatic, and completely uninhibited. What do you think it is about that transformation that resonates with people?
I think it taps into this universal desire to break free from the constraints of everyday life, to let loose and be our most authentic selves, even if it means getting a little wild and crazy. But the critique also points out that the film takes some creative liberties with the source material, especially when it comes to the visual style.
Right. The visuals are one of the film's most striking elements.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the relatively modest budget they had to work with. The critique praises their innovative use of CGI, which was still quite new at the time, combined with practical effects to create this cartoonish world.
It really does feel like a live-action cartoon at times. And the critique specifically mentions that vibrant blend of contemporary and vintage aesthetics in Edge City, the fictional setting. It's like stepping into a dream world where anything is possible. But getting back to those technical aspects for a moment, the critique actually brings up a couple of weaknesses in the film's execution. One of them is the portrayal of the villain, Dorian Tyrell.
Yeah, the critique argues that. Compared to Stanley, Dorian is quite one-dimensional. His motivations are pretty straightforward, greed and power, and his transformation under the mask feels less nuanced, less psychologically impactful.
So he lacks that internal conflict that makes Stanley so compelling. It's interesting that the critique points this out, because in a way, it highlights the film's strength in exploring those deeper layers of identity.
Right. Stanley's journey is not just about putting on a mask. It's about confronting his own fears and insecurities and ultimately finding his own voice. Dorian, on the other hand, seems to simply embody the negative aspects of the mask's power without much self-awareness or inner struggle.
It almost makes you wonder if the film could have benefited from exploring Dorian's character a bit more, giving him a backstory or motivations that were more complex than just pure villainy.
Perhaps. But it's also worth noting that the film's primary focus is on Stanley and his transformation. Dorian serves as a foil to Stanley, representing the potential dangers of unchecked power and a lack of self-awareness.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all of these elements, the characters, the themes, the visual style, they all come together to create this unique and engaging cinematic experience.
Exactly. And before we move on, I think it's worth taking a moment to consider the film's lasting impact. We've already touched on its role in boosting Jim Carrey's career. But what about its cultural influence as a whole? What do you think The Mask contributed to cinema or pop culture in general?
Well, it definitely popularized that blend of CGI and practical effects, which paved the way for other films to experiment with creating these fantastical worlds on screen. And it also, I think, tapped into a certain zeitgeist of the 90s, this desire for escapism and a celebration of individuality.
That's a great point. The 90s saw a rise in films that embraced the weird, the wacky, and the unconventional. The Mask, in many ways, embodies that spirit. It's a film that encourages you to let loose, to be yourself, and to embrace the absurdity of life.
But hold on, I'm curious about something. The critique mentions that the film doesn't fully explore the origins and full potential of the Mask's powers. It hints at a deeper mythology, but we never really delve into it. Do you think that's a missed opportunity?
That's an interesting point. I think it depends on how you view the film. If you see it primarily as a fun, escapist comedy, then maybe the lack of deep lore isn't a big deal. But if you're looking for a more complex exploration of the Mask's mythology, then you might be left wanting more. It's almost as if the filmmakers chose to focus on the immediate impact of the Mask on Stanley's life, rather than getting bogged down in explaining its ancient origins or the full extent of its powers.
So it's a matter of focus, right? They chose to prioritize the character journey and the comedic elements over a deeper exploration of the supernatural aspects.
Exactly. And that choice, ultimately, is what gives the film its unique flavor. It's a delicate balance between fantasy and reality, between the personal and the mythic.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the characters, the themes, the visual style, the adaptation choices, and even the film's weaknesses.
Yeah, we have. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to unpack, especially when it comes to the film's deeper themes and its lasting impact on pop culture.
You're right. There's always more to discover. But before we dive into that, I want to take a moment to hear from you, the listener. What are your initial thoughts on The Mask? What stands out to you about this film? What resonates with you? Let us know your thoughts.
We want to hear from you. It's fascinating how this film, even with its comedic core, manages to touch on some pretty profound ideas about identity and self-expression. The critique spends a good amount of time analyzing how Stanley's transformation goes beyond just the physical changes.
Right. It's not just about turning green and getting superpowers. It's about tapping into something deeper within himself. Do you think that's why the film still resonates with audiences today?
I think it's a big part of it. We all have those moments where we wish we could shed our inhibitions, let loose, and embrace a different side of ourselves. The Mask, in a sense, becomes a symbol of that liberation.
It's like it gives him permission to be his authentic self, even if that self is a bit chaotic and unpredictable.
Exactly. And the critique makes a really interesting point about how the film uses visual cues to reinforce this idea of transformation. Think about the scenes where Stanley first puts on the mask. The colors become more vibrant, the music swells, and the world around him literally starts to warp and bend to reflect his newfound energy.
Oh, you're right. It's not just about him changing. It's about the whole world around him transforming as well, almost like he's stepping into a different reality, one where the rules are more fluid and playful.
And that brings us to another key aspect highlighted in the critique, the film's remarkable visual style. Even with its relatively modest budget, The Mask managed to achieve some groundbreaking special effects for its time.
I remember being blown away by those effects as a kid. The way the mask's face stretches and morphs, the cartoonish physics, the way he interacts with the environment, it all felt so fresh and imaginative.
Yeah, the critique dives into the technical aspects, pointing out how the filmmakers seamlessly blended CGI and practical effects to create this cartoonish aesthetic. For instance, in the scene where the mask pulls a seemingly endless line of guns from his pocket, they used a combination of CGI and forced perspective to achieve that impossible feat.
Oh, wow, I never realized that. It really highlights the ingenuity of the filmmakers. They managed to create these visually stunning and hilarious moments without relying solely on cutting-edge technology.
Right. And that blend of practicality and digital artistry is what gives the film its unique charm. It feels both grounded and fantastical at the same time. But let's move on to another aspect that the critique touches on the film's music. Remember the Cuban Pete number?
Of course. Who could forget that? It's such a joyous and energetic scene, and it really showcases the film's playful spirit.
The critique praises the way the film incorporates musical numbers into the narrative, not just as background elements, but as integral parts of the storytelling. Cuban Pete is a prime example. It's not just a random dance sequence. It's a moment where Stanley, as the mask, fully embraces his newfound freedom and charisma.
You know, I never thought of it that way before. It's like the music itself becomes a manifestation of the mask's power, this infectious energy that spreads to everyone around him.
Exactly. It's a brilliant way to blend visual storytelling with musical expression, and it's a technique that the film uses quite effectively throughout.
It also highlights that amazing chemistry between Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz. Their dance, moves, their facial expressions, it all just works so well together.
Absolutely. Speaking of Cameron Diaz, the critique points out that her role as Tina Carlisle is far more than just a love interest. She has her own agency, her own motivations, and she plays a crucial role in challenging Stanley's assumptions and helping him grow as a character.
You're right. She's not just a damsel in distress waiting to be rescued. She's a strong, independent woman who holds her own against both Stanley and the mask.
And their dynamic adds another layer of complexity to the film's exploration of identity. Tina represents a different kind of mask, the one we wear to protect ourselves from getting hurt, the one that keeps us at a distance from others.
That's an interesting observation. I never thought about it in terms of masks, but it makes sense. She's guarded, cautious, and initially skeptical of Stanley's advances. But as she gets to know him both as Stanley and as the mask, she begins to let down her own walls.
Right, and their relationship becomes a catalyst for both of them to confront their own vulnerabilities and insecurities.
But the critique also brings up a valid point about the film's portrayal of the villain Dorian Tyrell. He seems a bit one-dimensional compared to the complexities of Stanley and Tina.
Yes, the critique argues that Dorian's motivations are pretty straightforward. Greed and power, and his transformation under the mask feels less nuanced and less impactful than Stanley's. Do you think the film could have benefited from exploring his character a bit more?
It's an interesting question. On one hand, I appreciate the film's focus on Stanley's journey, but on the other hand, I can see how a more fleshed-out villain could have added another layer of depth to the story.
Perhaps. But it's also worth noting that the film's primary focus is on exploring the concept of identity and transformation through the lens of comedy and fantasy. Dorian, in a way, serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what can happen when power is unchecked and self-awareness is lacking.
That makes sense. He represents the shadow side of the mask's potential. The darker impulses that can emerge when we lose ourselves in the pursuit of pleasure and power.
Precisely. But let's shift gears for a moment and delve into a specific scene that the critique highlights as a prime example of the film's visual flair and comedic brilliance. Remember the scene at the Coco Bongo Club where the mask causes chaos and disrupts a robbery attempt?
Of course. That scene is pure cinematic mayhem, a perfect blend of action humor and visual spectacle.
The critique praises the way the filmmakers use a combination of practical effects, stunts, and CGI to create this over-the-top sequence that feels both believable and completely absurd at the same time. For example, the moment where the mask inflates a balloon animal into a giant menacing creature is achieved through a combination of animatronics and digital effects, seamlessly blending the real and the unreal.
You're right. And it's not just about the visual effects. It's about the comedic timing, the physicality of Carrey's performance, and the way he interacts with the environment and the other characters. It's a masterclass in comedic filmmaking.
And it's a scene that perfectly encapsulates the film's overall tone, a blend of cartoonish energy, witty humor, and a healthy dose of self-awareness.
I love how the film never takes itself too seriously. It embraces its absurdity, and that's what makes it so enjoyable to watch.
Absolutely. But let's not forget that beneath all the humor and visual spectacle, the mask is also making a statement about the importance of self-expression and embracing our true selves.
You're right. It's a reminder that we all have those hidden parts of ourselves, those sides we might be afraid to show the world. And maybe, just maybe, it's okay to let those sides out to play once in a while.
And who knows? Maybe embracing those hidden parts of ourselves can lead to unexpected growth, new experiences, and a deeper understanding of who we truly are.
That's a powerful thought. But before we get too philosophical, I want to take a moment to connect this back to you, the listener. Imagine for a moment that you found the mask. What aspects of your personality would be amplified? What hidden desires or talents would come to the surface?
It's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? to consider what our own mask persona would be like. Would we embrace the chaos and mischief like Stanley? Or would we use the mask power for good, becoming a superhero of sorts?
I think it all comes down to who we are at our core and what we truly value.
Exactly. And the beauty of the mask is that it invites us to explore those questions, to delve into the complexities of identity and self-expression, all while entertaining us with its wit, charm, and visual spectacle. But let's not stop there. There's still more to uncover about this film's lasting legacy and the deeper messages it conveys about our own humanity. As we've been discussing The Mask, it's become clear that this film is more than just a wacky 90s comedy. The critique really dives into its lasting impact, both on Hollywood and on pop culture as a whole.
Yeah, you're right. It is interesting to think about how this film, released almost 30 years ago, continues to resonate with audiences today. What do you think contributed to its staying power?
Well, for one thing, it launched Jim Carrey into superstardom. His performance as the Mask is iconic, and it really solidified his place as a comedic legend.
Absolutely. Carrey's energy and improvisational skills are like a perfect match for the character. It's hard to imagine anyone else bringing the mask to life in quite the same way.
Yeah, I know, right? The critique also highlights the film's groundbreaking use of special effects. Remember, this was 1994, and CGI was still in its early stages. The Mask pushed the boundaries of what was possible with visual effects, seamlessly blending computer-generated imagery with practical effects to create this cartoonish world.
It's true. The scene where the Mask pulls an endless string of guns from his pocket, the way his face stretches and morphs, the over-the-top action sequences, it all looks so effortless and seamless. It's a testament to the skill and creativity of the filmmaker.
It really is. And let's not forget the film's influence on fashion and music. The zoot suit, the fedora, the Cuban Pete dance craze. These elements became synonymous with The Mask and really permeated pop culture in the years following its release.
Yeah, it's amazing how a film can have such a wide-reaching impact, influencing everything from fashion to music to special effects. It speaks to the power of a truly creative and imaginative vision.
Exactly. And that vision, I think, is what ultimately lies at the heart of The Mask's enduring appeal. It's a film that celebrates individuality, encourages us to embrace our inner weirdness, and reminds us that it's okay to let loose and have a little fun. But beyond the surface-level entertainment, the critique also digs into the film's deeper themes, particularly its exploration of the masks we all wear in our daily lives.
Oh, right. We've talked about how Stanley's transformation represents a kind of liberation, a shedding of inhibitions and societal expectations. But the film also seems to be saying something about the masks we wear to protect ourselves, to hide our vulnerabilities, and to fit in with the crowd.
That's a great point. Tina Carlisle, the character played by Cameron Diaz, embodies this idea of a protective mask. She's initially guarded and skeptical, but as she gets to know Stanley, she begins to let down her walls and reveal her true self.
It's interesting how the film uses these two characters, Stanley and Tina, to explore different aspects of identity and self-expression. Stanley's transformation is outward, a physical manifestation of his inner desires. Tina's transformation is more internal, a gradual process of shedding her emotional armor and allowing herself to be vulnerable.
Right. And their relationship, in many ways, becomes a catalyst for both of them to confront their own insecurities and embrace their authentic selves.
It's a reminder that true connection and intimacy require us to let go of the masks we wear and show our true faces, flaws and all.
Exactly. And that's a message that resonates deeply, even decades after the film's release. We all struggle with these issues of identity, self-acceptance, and the desire to connect with others on a genuine level.
Thinking back on our conversation, it's incredible how much depth and nuance there is to The Mask, a film that's often categorized as like a simple comedy. The critique really helped us unpack those layers and appreciate the film on a whole new level.
I completely agree. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly lighthearted films can contain profound insights and thought-provoking themes. And that's the beauty of art.
Yeah.
It has the power to entertain us, challenge us, and make us think about the world in new ways.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Mask, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to ponder?
I think it's this. Embrace your inner mask, that part of you that yearns to break free from conventions and express your true self. But remember, true transformation comes from a place of self-awareness and a willingness to connect with others authentically.
Beautifully said. So the next time you watch The Mask, don't just focus on the laughs. Look deeper. Explore the themes and consider the masks you wear in your own life.
Yeah. And remember, sometimes the most profound lessons come disguised as pure entertainment.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.